I remember the first time I truly understood emptiness. Not the emptiness of loss or loneliness, but the profound emptiness that holds infinite possibility. I was standing alone in my cocoon after hours of training, my body exhausted, my mind still racing. The room was silent except for my breathing, and in that silence, a question emerged. What happens when you strip away everything you've been taught? When you remove all the systems, all the structures, all the shoulds and musts that have shaped your entire existence? Most people never ask this question. They live their entire lives following paths others have carved out, never realizing they're walking in borrowed footsteps. They measure their success against standards they never chose. They fight battles that were never theirs to begin with. When I first arrived in America, I carried with me not just my physical belongings, but the weight of tradition, expectation, and rigid thinking. I was a vessel filled to the brim with techniques, philosophies, and approaches passed down through generations. I thought this fullness was my strength. I was wrong. You see, the martial arts world I entered was filled with styles, systems, classifications, boxes people desperately tried to fit themselves into. Wing Chun, karate, judo, taekwondo, each claiming superiority, each trapped within its own limitations, each forgetting the most fundamental truth about combat and about life. Reality has no form. The opponent standing before you doesn't care about your perfect form. Life doesn't reward you for following rules that limit your expression. The world doesn't stop and wait while you try to remember the correct response to its challenges. And yet, look around you. Look at how people live, minus trapped in rigid thinking, clinging to outdated beliefs, suffocating their true nature to conform to some idealized image of who they should be. They've become hardened, brittle, fixed in shape, minus the opposite of water. Water minus the softest substance in the world, minus can penetrate the hardest rock, not through force, but through persistence, adaptability, and by following its true nature without resistance. When you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. Put it into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. But this isn't just some poetic metaphor. This is a fundamental principle that can transform every aspect of your existence, minus your relationships, your work, your personal growth, even the way you face your deepest fears and limitations. Let me share something personal with you. When I was developing Jeet Kune Don't, many traditionalists accused me of disrespect, of betraying centuries of martial arts wisdom. They couldn't understand that by questioning everything, I wasn't destroying tradition, minus I was honoring its deepest essence. The essence of martial arts isn't the preservation of form, it's the pursuit of truth. The truth is simple but devastating. There is no one path to mastery, minus in combat or in life. There is only your path, discovered through honest self-examination, relentless questioning, and the courage to express what is natural to you. When you punch, are you truly expressing yourself, or are you performing someone else's idea of a perfect punch? When you speak, are those really your words, or echoes of what you think others want to hear? When you dream, are they truly your dreams, or reflections of what society has told you to desire? These questions may seem philosophical, but their implications are intensely practical. A fighter who blindly follows a system without understanding its principles will always be defeated by someone who has internalized those principles and adapted them to their unique attributes. A person who lives by external validation will always feel hollow compared to one who has found their authentic voice. Think of the bamboo in a violent storm. The rigid oak tries to stand unmoved and eventually breaks. The bamboo bends, adapts, flows with the wind, minus, and survives. The bamboo, not rigid, not fixed, but yielding, adaptable, responsive to life as it unfolds, not as you wish it would be. I developed 1-inch punch not to demonstrate power, but to reveal a truth. Real strength doesn't come from physical distance, it comes from internal unity. When mind, body, and spirit align perfectly in a single moment, even an inch of physical movement can generate devastating impact. The same principle applies to every area of life. When your thoughts, words, and actions align perfectly with your authentic self, even small efforts create massive results. Now, let me ask you something important. When was the last time you felt completely free? Not just physically unrestricted, but mentally and emotionally liberated. When did you last act without concern for judgment, speak without filtering your truth, or move without calculating the impression you were making? For most people, that freedom was lost somewhere in childhood, buried under layers of socialization, expectation, and the desperate need to belong. We trade our authenticity for acceptance, our natural expression for security. I see this tragedy played out every day, minus people with extraordinary potential living ordinary lives because they've accepted the boundaries others have placed around them. They've forgotten that these boundaries exist only in the mind, and what exists in the mind can be transformed by the mind. Let me tell you about 3 invisible prisons that are likely keeping you from expressing your true potential. 3 mindsets that act like chains on your spirit. I didn't learn about these from any book or teacher. I discovered them through painful personal experience, through moments of failure that revealed deeper truths than any success could teach. The first prison, the need for approval. This is perhaps the most insidious of all limitations because it disguises itself as virtue. We're taught from childhood that being liked, being accepted, is paramount. But this pursuit of universal approval creates a fragmented self, minus a person who changes faces depending on the audience, who never fully commits to their truth for fear of rejection. I remember early in my Hollywood career being told to play stereotypical roles, to be the exotic Asian martial artist who makes strange sounds and never gets the girl. Taking those roles would have brought approval, opportunities, advancement. Refusing them meant conflict, criticism, closed doors. But true freedom began when I realized this profound truth. It's better to be rejected for who you are than accepted for who you are not. The second prison, the attachment to certainty. Human beings crave security, predictability, guaranteed outcomes. We want assurances before we act, certainties before we commit. But this attachment to knowing the end before we begin keeps us trapped in familiar territory, never venturing into the unknown where true growth occurs. When I left Hong Kong for America, I had no guarantees. When I began questioning traditional martial arts approaches, I had no certainty that what would emerge would be better. When I developed Jeet Kune Do, I stepped into uncharted territory with no map, no guide. Only my own intuition and commitment to truth. The path to mastery is never clear. It reveals itself only to those willing to step forward into fog, to those who understand that certainty is the enemy of possibility. The martial artist who will only practice techniques they've already mastered remains forever limited. The person who will only take risks with guaranteed outcomes never discovers their true capacity. The third prison, the identification with past and future. Most people exist primarily in memory or anticipation, rarely in the present moment. They're either dwelling on past failures, reliving past successes, or projecting themselves into future scenarios minus some feared, some desired, none real. But combat teaches an undeniable truth. There is only now. In a fight, if your mind is reliving your last move or planning 3 moves ahead, you've created a gap in your awareness minus, and in that gap lies defeat. Life operates by the same principle. Power, joy, creativity, and authentic expression exist only in the present moment. I train my body to respond instantaneously without the delay of thought, not just for fighting efficiency, but because this state of responsive presence is where we access our deepest capabilities. When you're fully present, fear dissolves, doubt disappears, and what remains is pure potential, unfiltered by mental limitation. These 3 prisons, minus the need for approval, the attachment to certainty, and identification with past and future minus they don't exist in the physical world. You won't find them with a microscope or detect them with any instrument. They exist only in the mind. Yet their impact on your life is more restrictive than any physical barrier could ever be. How do you break free? It begins with awareness, minus the simple but difficult practice of noticing these patterns as they arise. When you feel that pull towards seeking approval, recognize it. When you hesitate because the outcome isn't guaranteed, acknowledge it. When you find yourself dwelling in past or future, rather than engaging with the present, bring yourself back. The first practice, empty your cup daily. Each morning, take 5 minutes of silence to let go of everything you think you know. Release your assumptions about your limitations. your expectations of how the day should unfold, your fixed ideas about who you are. Begin each day as an empty vessel, ready to receive new experiences without the filter of preconception. Most people start their day already full of yesterday's conclusions, full of plans and predictions, full of rigid identities. They leave no room for discovery, no space for growth. The cup that is already full cannot receive anything new, but the empty cup has infinite potential. The second practice, seek discomfort purposefully. Once a day, do something that takes you beyond your comfort zone, minus something small enough to be achievable, but significant enough to create tension. Speak up when you would normally remain silent. Remain silent when you would normally speak. Take a different route. Ask a question you're afraid to ask. Express a truth you've been hiding. Growth occurs at the edge of comfort, never in its center. The muscle that is never stressed never grows stronger. The mind that is never challenged never expands. The spirit that is never tested never discovers its resilience. The third practice, find your authentic rhythm. Most people live at a pace that isn't their own, minus either racing to keep up with external demands or procrastinating to avoid what they fear. Neither is natural, neither expresses their true rhythm. Spend time discovering your natural cadence, minus in movement, in work, in conversation, in rest. When do you feel most aligned, most present, most energized? That is your authentic rhythm. Honor it. Express it. Don't apologize for it. I discovered early in my training that each person has a natural timing, a signature rhythm that, when honored, allows for maximum power with minimum effort. Fighting against your natural rhythm creates tension. Flowing with it creates power. The same is true in every area of life. The fourth practice, practice dying to the old self. Each night, review your day and identify one belief, one habit, one aspect of your identity that you're ready to release, not because it's wrong, but because it no longer serves your growth. Visualize it dissolving, creating space for something new to emerge. This daily practice of small deaths prepares you for the larger transformations life will demand of you. The martial artist who cannot let go of a technique that once worked but no longer serves will eventually be defeated. The person who cannot release their outdated self-image will eventually be imprisoned by it. Remember, water has no permanent form. It doesn't cling to any particular shape. It doesn't insist on remaining as it was. It transforms as circumstances require, minus from liquid to solid to vapor, and back again, minus without resistance, without attachment. These four practices aren't separate from your life. They're meant to be integrated into it. They don't require special equipment or dedicated hours. They require only your awareness and your commitment to living more authentically, more freely, more powerfully. Now, let me share something few people understand about human potential. We often think of growth as addition, minus gaining new skills, accumulating more knowledge, building greater strength. But the deepest transformation comes not from adding, but from removing, minus stripping away the artificial, the inauthentic, the unnecessary. Think of Michelangelo's approach to sculpture. When asked how he created his masterpiece, David, he said he simply removed everything that wasn't David. The perfection was already within the marble. His genius was in revealing it. Your authentic self, minus powerful, creative, unlimited, minus already exists beneath layers of conditioning, beneath habitual patterns, beneath the armor you've built to protect yourself from life's uncertainties. True growth isn't about becoming someone new. It's about revealing who you've always been beneath these accumulated layers. This is why I eventually removed the mirror from my training room. I realized I wasn't seeing myself in that reflection, minus I was seeing my idea of myself, my judgment of myself, my comparison of myself to some external standard. The mirror had become another prison, another attachment to form rather than essence. The day I trained without mirrors was the day I began to feel my movements rather than see them, to experience them from within rather than observe them from without. And in that internal awareness, I discovered a fluidity, a naturalness that no external observation could have revealed. Your journey toward water-like adaptability requires the same shift, minus from external validation to internal awareness, from outer appearance to inner authenticity, from how things look how they actually are. Let me tell you about a particular morning that changed my understanding forever. I was practicing a complex sequence of movements, one I'd performed thousands of times before. But this day was different. As I moved, I suddenly became aware of a subtle tension in my shoulder, a holding pattern I'd never noticed. This tension wasn't just physical, it represented a deeper pattern minus my habit of trying too hard, of forcing outcomes rather than allowing them to emerge naturally. In that moment of awareness, something shifted. I didn't try to correct the tension, I simply observed it without judgment. And in that observation, without any effort on my part, the tension began to dissolve. Movement that had required effort became effortless. Technique that had seemed complex became simple. What changed wasn't the movement itself, but my relationship to it. This is the paradox at the heart of personal transformation. The harder you try to change yourself, the more you reinforce the belief that you're not good enough as you are. Real change comes not from striving to become different, but from understanding and accepting who you already are. Not from adding new layers, but from removing those that obscure your essence. The martial artist who focuses only on acquiring new techniques without integrating them naturally will always appear mechanical, always be a step behind those who've made the art their own. The person who collects self-improvement strategies without addressing their fundamental relationship with themselves will always feel incomplete, always chasing the next fix, the next system, the next guru. Now, let me present you with a 7-day challenge, -1, that will begin the process of transforming your relationship with yourself and with life. This isn't about dramatic overnight change. It's about setting in motion subtle shifts that over time create profound transformation. Day 1, observe without judgment. For this entire day, practice noticing your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without labeling them good or bad, right or wrong. Just observe. Notice how often you criticize yourself. Notice when you hold back your authentic expression. Notice when you seek approval. Don't try to change anything, simply become aware. Day 2, question one belief. Identify one limiting belief you hold about yourself minus a none. Not creative. I'm bad with money. I'm too old to start something new, Ines, and spend the day questioning it. Not fighting it, not trying to replace it with a positive affirmation, but genuinely examining it. Where did this belief come from? What evidence have you collected to support it? What might be possible if this belief weren't true? Day 3, express before you edit. In your communications today, minus whether writing, speaking, creating, minus practice expressing your first natural response before your internal editor takes over. This doesn't mean being rude or thoughtless. It means allowing your authentic reaction to emerge before you reshape it to meet expectations. Notice the gap between what you naturally want to express and what you eventually do express. Day 4, move from your center. Throughout the day, bring awareness to your physical center minus the area just below your navel that Japanese martial traditions call the hara. The seat of your intrinsic power. Before each action, each conversation, each decision, take a second to connect with this center. Move from here rather than from your extremities. Speak from here rather than from your throat or head. Choose from here rather than from external pressure. Day 5, create space between stimulus and response. Practice pausing briefly before reacting to situations, especially challenging ones. In this tiny space, minus even half a second, minus lies your freedom to choose a response rather than being driven by conditioning. This isn't about suppressing your natural reactions, but about creating room for choice in how you express them. Day 6, embrace one fear. Identify something you've been avoiding out of fear, minus a conversation, a creative endeavor, a decision minus, and move toward it intentionally, not recklessly, but with awareness. The goal isn't the outcome, but the willingness to engage with what you fear, to feel the discomfort without being controlled by it. Day 7, celebrate your authentic expression. Notice and acknowledge moments when you expressed yourself authentically, when you chose truth over comfort, when you responded to life directly rather than through the filter of conditioning. These moments, however small, are victories minus not because they achieved any external result, but because they represented your genuine self in action. This 7-day challenge isn't about perfection. There will be moments you forget times you fall back into old patterns. That's not failure. That's part of the process. The martial artist who never loses balance never discovers how to regain it. The person who never falters never learns how to rise again. What matters isn't flawless execution, but continued return minus coming back again and again to the practice of awareness, the commitment to authenticity, the pursuit of your own truth rather than someone else's prescription for your life. Remember, water doesn't fight obstacles. It flows around them. It doesn't struggle against gravity. It surrenders to it, and in that surrender finds its path. Similarly, your growth doesn't come from battling against yourself, but from aligning with your deeper nature. From removing the obstacles to your natural expression, rather than forcing yourself into unnatural forms. Let me share a final story. Years ago, a young student approached me after class, frustrated with his progress. "I've been training for years," he said, "but I still don't feel like I've mastered anything. Sometimes I think I knew more when I first began." I smiled, recognizing in his words my own journey. "And you first began," I told him, "and you knew techniques. Now you're beginning to know yourself. This feels like less because it's no longer something you possess, it's something you are." "An only meaningful standard," I replied, "and is whether you're expressing yourself more authentically today than you were yesterday. Everything else is just comparison to arbitrary forms that have nothing to do with your unique journey." "See, your authentic expression," I told him, "feels like freedom, not like achievement or validation or security, minus like freedom. When you're expressing your true nature, there's no separation between what you're doing and who you are, no gap between intention and action, no distance between your inner experience and your outer expression. You become like water minus unified, responsive, powerful in your natural flow. This is the essence of what it means to be formless, shapeless, like water. Not without structure, but without fixed structure. Not without direction, but without predetermined direction. Not without power, but without forced power. Your authentic self isn't something you need to create, it's something you need to uncover. It exists beneath the strategies you've developed to gain approval, beneath the armor you've built to avoid pain, beneath the identities you've constructed to make sense of your place in the world. When you strip away everything that isn't truly you, minus all the shoulds and musts, all the limitations you've accepted without question, all the compromises you've made to fit in, minus what remains is both less and more than you imagined, less rigid, more fluid, less certain, more alive. Finished, more free. This is the paradox that few ever fully grasp. True mastery isn't about becoming something. It's about unbecoming everything that isn't you. True strength isn't demonstrated by standing rigid against the currents of life, but by flowing with them while maintaining your essential nature. True wisdom isn't found in accumulating more knowledge, but in being humble enough to admit how little you really know. Be water, my friend, not just as a philosophical concept or a poetic metaphor, but as a lived reality. Let go of who you think you should be and allow who you truly are to emerge. Release your attachment to specific outcomes and discover the power of responding to what actually is. Empty your cup of preconceptions and experience the world directly as it is, not as you've been told it is. The journey I'm inviting you to undertake isn't easy. It requires courage minus the courage to question everything you've been taught about who you are and what you're capable of. It demands honesty minus the willingness to see yourself clearly, without the distortions of ego or the filters of conditioning. It calls for persistence minus the commitment to return, again and again, to the practice of awareness, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. But this journey also offers what few other paths can promise, the possibility of genuine freedom. Not freedom from circumstances minus life will always present challenges beyond your control minus, but freedom within circumstances, the freedom to respond authentically rather than reactively, the freedom to express your unique nature rather than conform to external expectations, the freedom to flow with life rather than struggle against it. Empty your cup, question your limitations, express before you edit, move from your center, create space between stimulus and response. Embrace your fears, Celebrate your authentic expression. These practices aren't ends in themselves, but doorways minus entrances to a way of being that transcends technique, that moves beyond system, that expresses your unique truth in every moment. Remember, the cup is useful only because of its emptiness. Your greatest strength lies not in what you accumulate, but in what you're willing to release. Your deepest wisdom comes not from what you know, but from what you're willing to discover. Be water, my friend, not just in how you move, but in how you think, how you feel, how you live. Be fluid enough to adapt without losing your essence. Be clear enough to reflect reality without distortion. Be powerful enough to carve new paths when necessary. Be water and discover what you've always been beneath the forms you've been taught to maintain. Be water and flow past the obstacles that once seemed insurmountable. Be water and find strength in yielding, power in adaptability, freedom in naturalness. Be formless, shapeless, like water, my friend. And in that formlessness, discover your true power, minus not the power to control life, but the power to flow with it, to respond to it, to express yourself through it with clarity, authenticity, and freedom.